building your immune system to functional medicine. This is something that is so critical, I believe, to our overall well-being. It's something that's kind of shone a light on over the last couple of years, particularly about what is health? What is it to be a fully functional human? Someone who adapts, someone who changes to the environments, keeps themselves well, practices holistic strategies to stay well, and doesn't rely on outside information, people, or ideas to change how our evolutionary system or structure has evolved. So we're delighted to be joined, of course, by our keynote speaker, Dr. Bob Rakowski, global health expert, clinical nutritionist with 3+ decades, educating doctors, Olympic athletes, people from all walks of life to be their best. Not only that is he a nutritionist, but also a chiropractor, helping adjust the skeletal system, looking at root cause as well from essentially kinesiology, looking at all the energy systems in the body as well. So a full complement of skill sets to really assess where people are. An immune system, I believe, is one of the top priorities, Dr. Bob, anyway, for living our best life. So why is it so important to prioritize our immune function to live our absolute best life?
Well, Eric, let's take the other extreme. Let's take the opposite end of it when we suddenly don't have an immune system, and in the 80s, people started to, learn about something called acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And very, very sadly, people had a virus that attacked the ability of the immune system to defend itself. And suddenly they were routinely dying from things that we're all exposed to on a daily basis that we don't even pay attention to. I like to tell people that our immune system in many ways is kind of like whatever we want to call it, our Secret Service or our CIA or whatever type of global defense. When it's working, it's there in the background. We don't even know it's doing its job. But when it fails, well, now we become aware. And the extreme is when the immune system's not working at all, guess what? You are going to die just from the stuff that's always in your body all the time. And because it's always there, as one of my mentors said, when it comes to toxins and parasites, it's not us against them, it's us with them. But we have more bugs in our gut than literally we have cells in the body, tons of viruses. This is just a proven fact. They're all there. With a good immune system, we thrive. We don't know we have any challenge, but when the immune system goes down, we're going down with it, sadly.
When it comes then to the enemies of the immune system, what would you classify are the top enemies of a healthy immune system?
Eric, I decided to ask that question of the medical pros. And you know what they said? They said it was viruses, it's bacteria, it's parasites, it's fungus, it's yeast. And it's none of those things because they're around us all of the time. There's way more of them than us. So I used to talk about stress and I used to talk about sugar, but why don't we go with the big four? Stress, toxins, malnutrition, physical inactivity, and there's good documentation that every single one of those keep your stress low, great immune system. Stress high, first thing we've known more than 50 years, stress is immunosuppressive. Toxins, we're beginning to see that there are some toxins and some people signed up to have them injected in their body that suddenly can be really bad for the immune system. And there are thousands of published studies on injected toxins triggering autoimmunity. And even with a new category of injected toxins, brand new, if you were to type in a new toxin that you're interested in about being injected and autoimmunity in PubMed.gov, oh my gosh, 50+ studies and rising by the day. Malnutrition, there's over 30,000 published medical studies on the importance of nutrition for the immune system. Then we start looking at physical activity. Guess what? It drives everything, including the microbiome, stress management, inflammatory process, brain chemistry, and certainly the immune system as well.
Yeah, I like how you summarize that really and just check the main pillars of the list. And really it's culminated with your Magnificent Seven that you've talked about over the years. It really is just getting those basic fundamental principles down and avoiding disaster by prevention rather than relying on a cure, so to speak.
Yeah. And, so a couple of years ago, people were promoting this health threat idea. And I had so many questions. I literally did 100 days of health updates. And people ask me, should I be worried? And I said, well, you should be worried if you want to suppress your immune system. Worry is not good for the immune system, but here's what you should be. You should be proactive. And what do we know is good for us? And if you want to go to the Magnificent Seven, eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every single day. It's a pretty good formula for the immune system as well as the rest of our body and life as well.
Yeah, and something you mentioned during those 100 days, because I was intrigued as to how someone in your position would handle and articulate and verbalize and serve other people at such a time where people needed support and guidance, when there was so much fear being shoved down people's throat. What does fear do for the immune system? How does it tie in with stress?
You know, I when I would teach a stress seminar, I have a graphic somewhere. It's called the anatomy of fear. Well, really, it's more like the physiology of fear. But when your body gets into fight or flight, anything that is not life critical at the moment, and keep in mind, the immune system takes a lot of energy. So think about that. If you've had the experience of having a cold or a flu, you realize your energy's down. Well, it's not that you have less energy. It's that your energy is prioritized inside instead of for outside activity like singing, dancing, training, things like that. Now you can still do it. You know, people that have wrapped their head around pushing their body to the limit, they can push through something like that. But most people, when they're dealing with something like that, they want to stay in bed. And you know what? If they just moved around a little bit, they'd probably get over it. And let me share that. There was a study. They gave some rats, poor rats, a really bad flu, like a lethal flu. And they put them in three categories. One group just got to sit around and do nothing. One group was put on a treadmill at a high pace 2 hours a day. And the other group, just maybe 30 minutes of gentle walking. Well, what they found out very, very simply is the group that had the most extreme exercise, nearly 80% of them died. Those that just sat around, about 50% of them died, but those that moved their body gently, less than 20%. So we do want to move, just not too much. There's always a sweet spot for it, and that sweet spot depends on where you are. But ultimately, what we want to be is proactive with rock solid information. And Eric, you know, here's what tended to be happen when we would submit that information. Somehow, some way, there were people that had a vested interest in not sharing that, and their voice was louder. And so a lot of people that were saying, hey, you might try this, guess what? We're deplatformed, censored, other things. Hopefully we're on the backside of that by now.
It's pretty upsetting to see when good information is pushed away, you know, and it's certainly something that people need. So I would always encourage people to exercise a level of a healthy skepticism. I won't say common sense, because honestly, I don't think it's that common.
No.
You know, someone said that before. I laughed at first, but then I realized actually that's true. It really is. Yeah. So surround yourself with people who are in the know, who demonstrate health and leadership and love and care and a purpose to help other people. Otherwise, who knows what you're going to get? Or as someone said before, stand up for something. Otherwise, you'll get blown over by anything. So, or you'll fall for anything. So, you know, really take that to heart and really look for those holes in information that won't serve you, because you'll pass on that information. Essentially, like almost like those relay runners in the Olympics. You're passing on what you take on board and you live in your life through your gene pool and through everyone else in your social circle. So be your own leader first and really follow some great advice. But just when it comes to the immune system, Dr. Bob, what are some of the predominantly rising immune challenges that people are presenting with today?
Well, if we're really going to look at what's challenging the immune system, let's go with global stress, global distress. And they have data on that and the mental health challenges. So we're going to put that number one. As far as we know, we have a higher level than we've ever had in history. And the numbers have doubled with people that are medically diagnosed with stress, distress, depression, anxiety, and those numbers have doubled nearly across every single demographic. So we want to make sure that stress doesn't turn out to be too big a thing. But then let's start talking about toxins. And whether we start talking about toxins in the air, the food, the water, they're universal. You know, they've done the human toxin inventory. They estimate everybody has over 700 toxins in their system at any one point in time. Those toxins definitely will cause an inflammatory process. The body buffers inflammation by releasing something called cortisol, a very powerful anti-inflammatory. But guess what? That's also an immunosuppressive issue. Malnutrition, top cause of death on the planet. Global Nutrition Report says every single country on planet Earth suffers malnutrition. And you start looking at that, 30,000 studies on nutrition and the immune system. So what are the challenges? It's really the bad, unempowering, unhealthy choices that somehow people are, I'm going to say, fooled into thinking are okay to consistently make. You know, what one of my mentors talked about, he says, you know, the biggest drug deal around is social media, because they figured out how to give people that dopamine hit with clickbait or something that they know is going to grab people's attention. And by the way, one of the things that really grabs people's attention is things that shock or frighten, because we're wired to be on the lookout for that. So, you know, my mentors talked years ago about making a news fast, you know, staying completely away from the news, which I've mostly done for decades at this time. And you know what? Every time I bring it back even a little bit, I say, why did I do that? You know, that just doesn't serve, and it's not news, it's bad news. So the real enemies, the real threats are bad choices, not surrounding yourself with good people in a good environment with things that nourish your body, mind, and spirit. That's a formula for disaster.
It sure is. Well, I'm going to phrase this question a little differently, Dr. Bob, because I realized once I reread it that it could be a flag issue when we post this. So I'm just curious, Dr. Bob, not from your opinion, but from what you see in the medical literature and proven data on this, how effective are shots for our immune system, and how necessary are they for us to thrive in this day and age?
You know, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put up the CDC's own data on that. And basically, we know that around 1900 in the US, about 80% of people actually died from infectious disease. Let me get that nice slide open, and I'm going to share the screen with that. And what you're going to see is, in a very, very fascinating way, is that there was about a 75% decline in death rate from infectious disease before the discovery of penicillin, 75%. And then you fast forward on that graph, and again, I give the data right there from CDC, and a 91% reduction in death rate from infectious disease before shots were widespread. And not a single drop since then. So you might ask, how did humans live the first 100,000 years without shots? The answer is, we did it by having a good immune system. And, you know, people like Michelangelo, you know, he lived to be like something like 90 years old. So this idea that people were just dropping like flies at young ages really wasn't very accurate at all. But as we start moving forward, if you go to the history of shots, there was a procedure called variolation. And so this was kind of brilliant. You know, they had problems with smallpox, and it was pretty serious. And when people had a smallpox lesion, let's say I had a smallpox lesion on my arm, well, what they would actually do is they would take a knife and they would cut into that lesion. And then, Eric, since you and I, you know, we want to share a little bit of immune data, I'd take your arm and I'd cut it open. And then I would rub my blood and pus and a lesion from smallpox into an open wound on you. And here's what happened. About 98% of the time, the person got a very mild case of smallpox, and then they had a lifetime immunity. Now, 2% of the time it was serious, and sometimes they died. So that was a problem. So a guy named Jenner made the observation, you know what, milkmaids don't get smallpox. They don't seem to, but they get something similar like cowpox. So then Jenner, on his own son, I wouldn't do this, but on his own son, his son was 8 years old. He took a milkmaid, cut open her cowpox lesion, cut his son's arm's lesion open, and they rubbed that pus and infectious material in. And here's where it gets real scary. 2 weeks later, Jenner exposed his 8-year-old son to smallpox. Guess what happened? He didn't get it. So that was the birth of modern day vaccination, which by the word vax comes from the word cow. How fascinating. Well, then fast forward, instead of taking actual immune material and body fluids, suddenly they start injecting things like mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, aborted fetal stem cells. And, you know, even most recently, they started programming genetics, the patient's own genes to start making foreign proteins. Now, that some would call that an advancement in medicine. Other people would say, well, okay, sounds like a really good idea. How did it turn out? Well, I'm going to have people investigate themselves. How did it turn out? Because there's plenty of people saying, my gosh, people are dropping dead all over the place. What in the world's going on here? You know? And again, we can't say it was that, and we can't say that it's not. We literally can't say anything. How fascinating. But here's what I'll say. It's worth looking into, isn't it?
It sure is. And if someone wanted to do their own research, Dr. Bob, what website do you believe is useful and accurate enough for people to just to get a general gist? Where do you draw on certain information? This was CDC, but...
Pretty good question. Well, we certainly haven't found the CDC to be good, you know. How fascinating is that? You get what they want you to know. And there's plenty of websites that we could recommend that, guess what, have been kind of attacked. Maybe for now, it just has to be private conversations. I don't really know how to answer that, Eric. There's an interesting medical doctor out of the UK, and he's medically minded, and he was supporting shots and other things like that. And most recently, he said, something's wrong. The governments need to look at it. People are dropping dead, 19-year-old athletes, 20-year-old athletes. Something is wrong. And then next thing you know, he came out and he apologized. He says, well, apparently I was irresponsible about what I said. I've got a strike against my YouTube channel. This is part of my revenue source. And I'm trying to educate the world. So he says, you know what, I need to be very careful about what I tell people. And I love that here what we're seeing is a guy who's attempting to be honest, attempting to ask good questions, but somehow, some way, even his questions aren't being allowed. So, I'm actually just kind of looking for his channel now, and oddly enough, it's not appearing in my feed. So interesting. But questions need to be asked, and I'm not going to lead anybody to any level of conclusion, except that if you seek, you'll find. Earnestly seek. And by the way, one guideline has always been follow the money. Follow the money. There's been a huge wealth transfer, like $5 trillion, and it's been said it went from the have-nots to the have-yachts. So quite interesting there.
It sure is. Well, with a slight pivot on that, Dr. Bob, how is the immune system directly connected to the gut and our gut health? What is the connection there, and why is it so critical to really look at this?
As many of my mentors would say, we're wonderfully made and there's this incredible grand design, but I want you to think about it. Where would something likely get into our body that would be problematic in terms of a microorganism? That's what we tend to think of as immune stressors. And it's possible we could breathe it, right? So there's plenty of upper respiratory issues, lower respiratory issues, but the greatest probability is the gut, something that we eat. And so the literature is clear. About 80% of our immune system is right around our gut, and for good reason. So if we're going to be exposed to a microorganism, that is the greatest probability there. So, it was Hippocrates that said all disease starts in the gut. Well, he wasn't right. That was an exaggeration, but they're now saying that all wasn't too big an exaggeration. They believe that most of the time they can trace about 90% of illness that people experience back to the gut. That's a pretty big number. So good reason to have the immune system there.
Absolutely. And it's something I used to go to my GPs in the past if I had a bacterial infection of some kind, and I'd be on an antibiotic, and I wasn't given any education on the balance in the gut post antibiotics, because I was told that if it's a bacterial infection, then you need an antibiotic to clear that. But I wasn't told that you needed to help repair the lining of the gut by getting in probiotics and all these things. So what kind of basics do people need to know to kind of protect the wall of the gut?
Well, first thing I want to talk about antibiotics. So one thing we know is that they're profoundly overused. And there's even one organism that's a result. It's called MRSA, MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, still kills over 100,000 people a year in U.S. hospitals because they've overused antibiotics. And, how often do people really need an antibiotic? I bet very, very rarely. Very, very rare. And so can you do natural things like vitamin C and reishi and zinc and quercetin and vitamin D? Those are the big ones that got a lot of press over the last year. But when you start talking about sealing and healing the gut, first and foremost, believe it or not, stress can cause a leaky gut. So we go back to that one again. We've got to buffer that stress. A food choice, which is inappropriate for you. If you create an inflammatory process in the gut, you can create a leaky gut. If you get antibiotics and then kill off good bacteria and overgrow bad organisms like yeast and fungus and things like that, well, guess what? That's going to make you prone to a leaky gut. So avoid antibiotics, take probiotics and be selective about your prebiotics. And I tell people, they have these categories of foods, but they name prebiotics. But I want to tell you what, everything's a prebiotic. Anything that you eat, your bugs are going to be exposed to it. If you make good choices, and this is a phrase that my mentors taught me: if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, stay away. Then you can keep that gut healthy. And then there's things like vitamin D, certainly proven to seal and heal the gut. Colostrum can seal and heal the gut. And having the right amount of digestive enzymes at the right time, including hydrochloric acid, can also help to enhance gut health and seal and heal the gut as well.
Beautiful. And what kinds of foods or environments could be triggers for either an immune response or an autoimmune response in the average person today?
The big ones that get flagged are gluten and dairy, and they've done that for a long, long time. But you and other people had asked some really brilliant questions. So I went back and said, is this food allergy phenomena brand new? It certainly has gotten worse and worse and worse with the genetic modification of food. And there's TED Talks on that. And, emergency room visits with anaphylaxis have gone up over decades. And by the way, some of that they're relating to shooting kids with toxins moments after they're born. And that's a pretty solid link there. But when you start looking gluten, dairy, citrus, tree nuts, those are the ones that get a lot of press. But remember, it was Lucretius that said one man's food's another man's poison. And he said that well over 2,000 years ago. And take it back even further. Over 5,000 years ago, there's documentation of people having some type of adverse food reactions. Maybe those were allergies. We don't really know. But ultimately, everything's a clinical trial. When people eat something, if they're trying something new for the first time, try it in moderation, see how it makes you feel. And generally, if it makes you feel okay, it's probably going to be okay. But people will do better doing what's called a rotation diet. If you get too much of the same thing too often and too frequently, ultimately, you could develop a sensitivity to it or even a full-blown allergy. So rotate good, clean foods and listen to your body is about the best advice that I can give to people.
Excellent. And what would, I know everyone is different, but what would you classify as an allergy response or a negative response? Is it as severe as skin irritations or lethargy or lack of concentration? What kind of scale are we working on here, Dr. Bob? What would you expect to see on both ends of the scale?
Well, the ones that you mentioned would probably be most common. People don't feel as good. Maybe they have a little bit of brain fog. Maybe they have a little bit of pain, which could be caused by an inflammatory process. Maybe the skin is expressing something because it's the largest organ of detoxification that we have, to full-blown what's known as anaphylaxis, which is a life-threatening circumstance. And there was a case here where this young lady, now this was decades ago, but her mother went on a search and find mission because her daughter, who had a peanut allergy, had an anaphylactic reaction that killed her after kissing her boyfriend after he ate a peanut butter sandwich. And you get on planes and I started wondering, where's this coming from? Southwest Airlines, they used to serve peanuts on their planes. And then they said, sorry, we can't do that. Too many people are having peanut allergies. Well, where in the world did this come from? That really didn't exist when I was growing up. And suddenly, I think most people know somebody that has a peanut issue. So whether it's just not feeling ideal after a meal or a life-threatening response, that's the gamut. But you hit it right on the head. What's most common? Maybe something doesn't feel right in your gut. Maybe it doesn't feel right in your brain. And there's that huge gut-brain connection. Maybe your energy is a little off. Maybe you have a little bit of ache or pain, challenge concentrating, skin expression, or much worse.
Yeah, I think as well, probably the quality of the foods perhaps are just what's really taking people down, so to speak, because of the lean towards more genetically modified practices to save a few bucks or to make more dollars, but on the back end, people are saving money. But you don't save money. You either pay now or you pay later, but you will pay either through currency or through your health. So certainly nuts, seeds, legumes, things like that maybe we haven't, well, certainly I think pulses and beans and things like that, we haven't been eating so much for so long because of the fact that we have to cook them and roast them and soak them and all these different things. They do take quite a lot to break down. So I think probably over the last while, particularly soy, I see is one of those heavily genetically modified crops, and corn, that people just seem to just make part of their staple diet, which I think is probably going to lead to more problems as well, as the vast majority of them are going to be genetically modified as well.
Yeah. And, if we turn the clock back just a few hundred years ago, if people had these things, they weren't genetically modified and they were in very low quantities. And, the Indians used to talk about maize and even a purple corn and things like that. Very, very different from what they're actually calling corn now. And there was a documentary called King Corn, and they started looking at the carbon footprint in people because carbon, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, that's a carbohydrate, that's glucose, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, that's fat, add nitrogen, you get protein, but again, to carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. So carbon's in all of us. And interestingly enough, what this guy had figured out, this scientist, through tissue analysis, was that the top carbon molecule in people was from corn, and worse yet, genetically modified corn. And he says they're feeding it to cows and to pigs and to chickens, and it's not natural in any of their diets. And corn's not a vegetable, it's a grain. But all of a sudden, when they genetically modified stuff, the pesticide companies, they said, oh, great, now we can spray more of this because they made this corn resistant to some of the horrible toxins they were spraying. And now they're beginning to link this to autism and cancer and birth defects and other challenges there. And you know what? There was a commercial when I was a kid. You can't fool Mother Nature. So, first they were genetically modifying the food. Hey, now they're suggesting genetically modifying humans. Not a good idea.
Absolutely not. No. When it comes then to the likes of reishi, Dr. Bob, our top superfood, we've been consuming it now for a number of years. And of course, we can't make claims about any products. Full disclosure, we share and love with a passion. But for myself, I went to Thailand in 2008 to embark upon an adventure, a boyhood adventure. I saw Kickboxer as a kid with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I said, wow, I would say it would be awesome to go to Thailand to learn how to fight. I'm going to do that sometime. And I did it. Went over, had an amazing time, but my immune system was challenged as someone came into the camp with a Staphylococcus infection, took out 8 of us, and my lungs shut down and I lost, wow, I don't even know how much weight I lost, but I lost a lot of weight. I went from the fittest shape of my life to the worst shape of my life in the space of 10 days. And I felt so low. And from that point, 2008 to 2014, until I saw a video of yours around reishi, I was really struggling. I was struggling with recovering from training. I was getting pretty much a cold every 6 to 8 weeks. I wasn't myself. I just wasn't running on all cylinders for 6 years. And as soon as I started to consume reishi, I noticed real positive shifts in my mood, my focus, as I was quite scatterbrained as well. But I noticed that shift in my immune system. I could feel myself getting stronger. So I'd love to just ask you, what is so special about reishi for the immune system particularly? And what does this immune modulation component of reishi really mean?
Well, first, let's talk about it. It's proven. You go to PubMed and you can find it. It's powerful in terms of an antibacterial. It can even kill MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. You start looking at it as an antiviral, it can block replication of even the HIV virus. I was on a podcast yesterday and I was sharing, but there was a study that came out early in 2020 with people that were exposed to a virus that was popular back then. And when they did traditional Chinese medicine along with what we're going to call Western medicine, the probability of dying went down by 28x. In other words, people that didn't do traditional Chinese medicine, of which reishi is a cornerstone, 28x more likely to die. So this is something that probably should have taken over the world right then and there, and people would realize. But it can help to eradicate herpes, H1N1, HPV. It kills yeast, it kills virus, it kills parasite, it kills fungus, it kills cancer. And when we start looking at the immune modulation, I'm not making a claim about any product. I'm telling you, go to PubMed and type in all those things and you'll see it. But when you start talking about immune modulator, people think of too little immune system, you get an infection. But too much immune response, well, guess what? You can have too much immune response against your own tissue. We call that immunity. Too much against foreign things, we call that allergy. Or how about too little defense instead of against foreign stuff, against your own stuff? That can cause cancer. So as an immune modulator, wherever your immune system needs help, reishi helps it. If it needs to pick it up in one aspect, it does. If it needs to calm it down, it does. So picture this, someone could have a raging bacterial infection and reishi will pick up that end of the immune system. But if they're also dealing with an autoimmunity, it has 430 unique molecules that in conjunction will calm down accelerated attack while at the same time ramping up the part of the immune system that needs it. So I often use the term, man's pharmacy versus God's pharmacy. You make the choice. I happen to know which pharmacy I pick and choose and what has stood the test of time as opposed to that which is brand new. Not that man's pharmacy never has anything to offer. Well, let's face it, a lot of problems following man's pharmacy. That's for sure.
Our lifetime subscription is locked in, I believe, on that one, Dr. Bob.
Absolutely.
And if you guys are going on to pubmed.gov to check out any of this stuff, it's also known as Ganoderma as well. So if you're going into pubmed.gov, put in reishi or Ganoderma in pubmed.gov and just any health challenge you can think of and check that out and see what comes back with, because some of those studies are pretty epic to see, but you probably won't see them on mainstream media anywhere. Let's just put it that way. But our king of coffee, this is something really, really special. The concept for me as a coach, Dr. Bob, really stood out to me because you can't change people. You cannot, I understand you can't change people. The only person you can change is the person you're looking at in the mirror every single day, and hope that your information and your articulation and love for the people will be extended out to those around you, and then they'll make the decision to act upon it accordingly or not, depending on their belief systems. But what I loved about this concept of putting this superfood inside of a habit that people love and do every day, which is coffee and tea, I thought that was amazing. I also thought it was pretty epic that they were able to take an organic coffee in the king of coffee, which is completely clean, and put the most nutrients dense portion of reishi, called the reishi spores, into this coffee. And now it is award-winning coffee option for people. But just apart from just that being an amazing product for people to enjoy, why is it so important for our immune systems to choose organic coffee and other products to avoid any immune challenges?
Well, there's this term that probably should be a lot more known than what it is. It's called Xeno Hormesis, and Xeno means foreign. Hormesis is communication. When we think of hormones, they communicate throughout our body. Well, what we know is when we eat food, we actually get the food's immune system. So by the way, if you're getting dead processed food, what do you get in a dead, non-existent immune system? And this became more popularized in Japan, where there were people to do this thing called forest bathing. And they realized if they go in the forest, they can document, a weekend in the forest, that their immune system is actually better for a month. So when these plants have to fend for themselves, when they have to develop an immune system, when we eat that plant, we get those messages for us. So how wonderful that we use the top superfood, USDA certified organic, in a way where our immune system gets the benefit. And there's plenty of people, now for 5,000 plus years that have realized, wow, I put this in my body gets better. So always a clean choice is a better choice, and consistency wins. The bad choices, you mentioned, the only person you can change. I love the Serenity Prayer. And then the modern Serenity Prayer. Serenity Prayer says, God, please help, grant me the wisdom, to, accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But the modern prayer is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people that I cannot change, the courage to change the one that I can, and the wisdom to know it's me. So what a great lead into that, right? We can only change ourselves, but guess what? We get better, stronger, faster, smarter, and hopefully there's a spillover effect to those we love, and even beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely true. I love that. I just see I have a couple of questions here in the chat. I'll just go through this now, guys, and hopefully get everyone's done. So a question here from Jenny. Oh, sorry, quickly from Matt. Sorry. Hey, Matt. Just curious when the CXT and toothpaste will be available in the UK. Any ideas on that one, Dr. Bob?
I hope soon. No, I don't know. I wish I did. Europe is an interesting place now, and the UK as well. Yeah, I guess you guys have considered that you are no longer part of them, but interesting enough.
Sure. Well, hopefully it'll be coming soon. For any of you guys who don't know what that is, that's essentially more reishi infused products for people to enjoy, because, if you brush your teeth and you like more energy, then that makes sense. I see Jenny has a question. Hi, my mom is 73 years old and doctors just discovered an 8mm kidney stone, which they have to remove next week sometime. What's your advice, or what can she do in the interim to maybe decrease the size?
Well, I used to recommend something called gravel root. But there's a company that has it called Weed Botanical. I'd have people take it every hour, safe for pregnancy. We even had a 9-month pregnant woman with a 9-millimeter stone take it every 15 minutes and dissolve it and pass it in 5 hours, and saved her a big challenge. So that part's good. But you know what? We've even seen people shrink stones with reishi. It's not a super strong primary benefit, but it may be the best thing we have at this point in time. So reishi every hour would be a good idea.
Beautiful. And that would be the reishi spores, Dr. Bob?
Spores are the strongest, you bet.
Excellent. So Jenny, just touch back to whoever introduced you to the call, or if you're already sharing this, please get your mum on some spores as soon as you can. Adri has a question. A friend was recently diagnosed with, I'll give this one a go, trigeminal neuralgia. She's battling a lot of different health challenges, all due to medical negligence 10 years ago. Advice on the best protocol to assist.
Oh, poor thing. Spores every waking hour. Trigeminal neuralgia also goes by the name tic douloureux. People feel like they have lightning bolts in their face, and it's just miserable, and medicine doesn't tend to help. But sometimes there's a physical trauma where cranial manipulation can be helpful, but spores every waking hour is where we would go. And Eric, I actually have a Zoom with an individual that's been trying to reach me for a while, so I'm going to go through these others real quick. Someone has a mother with 12% kidney function. You got to get that diabetes under control. Again, reishi is quite good for that, but ketogenic diet, low amounts, fair amounts of water. I've had people on kidney transplant list turn it around where they no longer qualify for the list because their kidney function is improved. When you're down 12%, it's probably the long haul, but literally everything counts. And someone has this terrible skin infection, neck down to hip. It's 4 days, not sure. It looks itchy, blisters. Doctor says it's fungal. Again, I'd recommend the spores every waking hour. That sounds bad enough where certainly you want to do a low starch diet because starch tends to feed yeast, fungus, and suppress the immune system. So ketogenic, reishi every hour. And then I do need to bounce to another call. And we certainly appreciate your diligence, your great questions, your commitment to your own wonderful health. Irish Superman, man, I'm glad. I couldn't imagine you being less than Superman, but how amazing that you had that level of infection that took you down for a period of time. I'm certainly glad you bounced back, and I know the world is happy too. So God bless all. Good night, and we'll see you next week, if not before.